Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Halacha. We are studying Shearim B'Tfilah, the wonderful sefer that goes through the many different languages, 13 of them, that are used to describe prayer. And we are up to the first one, Bitzur, which represents the notion of davening, of praying to God out of a sense of tsar, a sense of distress. We've mentioned that according to Rambam, there is a daily obligation on a deoraita biblical level to pray, while the Ramban says the daily obligation, and that's Nachmanides, the daily obligation to pray is rabbinic, while there is a biblical obligation to pray when we are in distress. So the question is, are these two opinions reconcilable or not? Famously, Rabbi Soloveitchik said they were, and I'd like to spend a few minutes this morning sharing the way that Rabbi Soloveitchik was able to reconcile the position of the Rambam and the Ramban. He says something really, really powerful. I'm going to read a few paragraphs. This is found in Reflections of the Rav, which is a collection of essays on Jewish thought, and this one is called Prayer as Dialogue. I recommend the full essay. I'm just going to give you some snippets. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, the views of Maimonides and Nachmanides can be reconciled. Both regarded prayer as meaningful only if it is derived from a sense of tsara, distress. They differ in their understanding of the word. Maimonides regarded daily life itself as being existentially in straits, inducing in the sensitive person feelings of despair, a brooding sense of life's meaninglessness, absurdity, lack of fulfillment. It is a persistent sarah which exists b'chol yom, daily. And Rabbi Soloveitchik goes on to talk about the notion of tsara, which is not as easily discernible as an external trouble. An external trouble is obvious. It could be a war, it could be a famine. An internal tsara, an internal trouble, is less easy to discern and takes a higher degree of sensitivity. Out of this sense of discomfiture, prayer emerges. Offered in comfort and security, prayer is a paradox. Modern methods of suburban worship and plush synagogues notwithstanding. Real prayer, he says, is derived from loneliness, helplessness, and a sense of dependence. Thus, while Nachmanides dealt only with the surface crisis, public distress, tsarot hatzibur, Maimonides regarded all life as a depth crisis, a tsarat yachid. Rabbi Soloveitchik's point here in explaining Rambam is so powerful. It goes back to how we started this chapter of Bitzur, this notion of creatureliness, that not only are we in need of God's help for the surface things, and surface doesn't mean unimportant, but it's the obvious things, but we're also in need of God's help for those deep depth crisis, what he calls, the existential crisis. I'll just read a little bit more to understand the difference between the surface crisis and the depth crisis. These two types of tsara vary in many aspects. The surface tsara of Nachmanides is an external one, which arises independently of man. It emerges out of the environment and usually appears suddenly. Our plight is discernible to the eye. We see it, feel it, suffer pain and anxiety. One need not be a reflective, introspective, or a brooding type to perceive this crisis. The simplest person experiences it: poverty, illness, famine, war, or death. It strikes like a hurricane. However, the depth tsara of the Rambam is an inner, personal, clandestine, and undefined crisis which is not readily manifest to the eye. It is perceived only by thinking and sensitive persons who wish to identify with it. It can be evaded, shunted aside by superficial people who will thereby avoid being affected. Others, however, search for it and willingly accept it. This type of crisis cannot be attributed to man's negligence or incompetence as the surface crisis. The depth crisis is clearly beyond solution. It is an existential reality, a condition of human existence. So Rabbi Soloveitchik uses the notion of prayer to give us a little insight into human existence. So quickly to review, the Ramban says biblically we're only obligated to pray when we are in distress. The Rambam says we are biblically obligated to pray every day. Rabbi Soloveitchik is able to square the circle, if you will, and say they both agree that we're only supposed to pray out of a sense of distress. But for the Rambam, we are always in this depth crisis where we question life. We have these big questions about our purpose. Are we fulfilling our purpose? What are we doing here on earth? Those are good questions to have, but they are a crisis. We should ask ourselves those questions because those are the type of questions, of course, that push us to engage more with what our purpose is and to perhaps focus ourselves to make sure that we are doing the most good that we can do. I wish everyone a wonderful day as we think about this really, really wonderful and important idea. Shalom.